What if the book of Genesis you read today isn't the whole story? Between the first and second verses, a silence lingers, deep, deliberate, and filled with questions. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But suddenly, the earth was formless and void, and darkness covered the face of the deep. How can perfection fall into chaos within a single breath? Something's missing. Some scholars believe it's not a matter of interpretation, but omission. A page, a paragraph, a hidden truth erased long ago, because it revealed far more than the world was ready to hear. There are truths so sacred that were hidden, pages so powerful that were erased from history. But today, you found your way here, and maybe, just maybe, it wasn't by chance. If something in this message awakens your spirit, don't let it stop you. Bring it to life. Let it travel. Leave your mark with a like. Share it with someone who needs it. And subscribe so that these forgotten truths will never be buried again. And if you're watching from somewhere far away, tell us in the comments where this truth reached you. We would like to know where our message reaches. Have you ever noticed how abrupt Genesis 1 feels? There's no introduction to the nature of God, no origin of evil, no context for the darkness, just the raw statement of creation, followed by ruin. It's as if we're entering a theater after the play has already begun. The early church fathers knew this tension, so did ancient rabbis. Some of them spoke cautiously of a prelude to Genesis, a section once known, then suppressed, not because it lacked meaning, but because it carried too much of it. The idea of a missing page may sound like conspiracy until you look closely at the gaps. Genesis 1:1 is majestic. Genesis 1:2 is troubling. A perfect God creates, yet the world is immediately desolate and dark. This isn't poetic contrast. It's a theological crisis. And throughout ancient history, many texts tried to explain this riddle. The Book of Jubilees hints at events before time. The Book of Enoch speaks of realms before the earth, and hidden within Jewish midrashim, there are whispers of a beginning that was undone before it could be known. If such a page existed and was removed, what did it say? Some believe it told of a war in the heavens before Genesis. Others say it revealed the fall of a being even before Lucifer. There are those who suggest that before our world, another creation was judged and destroyed. This would explain the darkness, the void, the chaos, a divine reset. But that kind of truth would have terrified the early world. A God who destroys before he builds, a creation before ours that failed. No wonder they may have torn that page out. If the darkness in Genesis 1:2 wasn't the beginning, but a consequence, then we're not just looking at a creation story. We're looking at the aftermath of something cosmic, a judgment, a silence forced into the narrative. Ancient interpreters didn't ignore this. The Hebrew word tohu vabohu, formless and void, is not used casually. It appears elsewhere in the Old Testament, always linked to destruction or desolation after divine wrath. What then had provoked God before he said, "Let there be light"? It is possible that the light spoken in Genesis 1:3 wasn't the beginning of everything, but the reintroduction of order into a fallen state. Some scholars call this the gap theory, suggesting that a vast era lies hidden between the first two verses of the Bible. But it's not just about time. It's about an erased event, a sacred memory lost. And according to some ancient Jewish sources, this missing section may have described beings who defied God long before humanity existed. There are scrolls found among the Dead Sea texts that reference a kingdom of light before Eden and its fall. These documents don't rewrite Genesis, but they seem to fill the void Genesis refuses to speak of. They describe thrones, rebellions and voices that challenge the authority of heaven. Could this be what was removed? Could Genesis have once included this cosmic backdrop, only for the early scribes to redact it, fearing its implications? Why would religious leaders hide such a page? Because truth can be dangerous, a narrative of rebellion before humanity, a creation that failed, or beings punished before the serpent ever spoke. All of this threatens the clean simplicity of doctrine. It introduces questions no system can easily answer. Is evil older than man? Did God allow imperfection before Eden? And most of all, what else has been hidden? To understand the weight of what might have been removed, we must look at who controlled the sacred texts. The scribes of ancient Israel were meticulous, but they were also gatekeepers. Not everything they received was preserved. Some writings were set aside, others burned, and some buried in deserts, far from temple walls. The idea wasn't to erase truth completely, but to protect the people from truths they weren't ready to face. Truths about realms, rebellions, and failures that predated mankind. Many early Christian thinkers also grappled with these gaps. Origen, for instance, believed in multiple worlds, created and destroyed before ours. He wasn't alone. Others hinted that creation wasn't a single act, but a cycle. Genesis, then, may not be the first account, but the first preserved one, a version refined for human ears. What if the missing page revealed not just events, but a completely different tone? One of conflict, one of risk. A divine experiment unfolding across realms, with humanity born as a second chance. There are fragments, dusty, fragile, dismissed by most, that describe a time when the heavens themselves trembled. Before Adam, before Eve, even before the light, something fell, and that fall brought with it a shattering silence. The page removed from Genesis may have told of that moment, of a voice that cried out against the Creator, of a rift so deep it echoed into the very fabric of creation. And so the next words had to be, "Let there be light," not because light was first, but because darkness had already spoken. This perspective does not deny the divinity of Scripture. It invites us to wonder how much of that divinity is still hidden, and how much was once revealed only to be concealed again. If God allowed certain truths to be written, and then allowed men to remove them, perhaps it was by design, a test not of knowledge, but of hunger. A page lost, to see who would still search for it. What if the missing page wasn't entirely destroyed, but scattered? Pieces of it may survive in ancient myths, in fragments of apocryphal texts, in symbols misunderstood by later generations. The serpent in Eden, for example, appears suddenly, fully aware, speaking, cunning. Where did it come from? Genesis doesn't say. But maybe the page that once existed did. Maybe it revealed an earlier confrontation, one that shaped the serpent's role and gave it a mission long before it ever saw Eve. Some traditions speak of the Watchers, divine beings who once guarded the boundary between heaven and earth. Others mention a realm of fire beneath the waters, a place where rebellious spirits were cast down before time was measured. These aren't inventions of fantasy. They are reflections of a spiritual memory older than Genesis. A page that told of battles before Eden, covenants broken in silence, and a divine order that had to be reforged through the creation of man. Even within Genesis, there are hints, fingerprints of a narrative that no longer exists in full. The plural, "let us make man in our image," has baffled readers for centuries. Who is God speaking to? Why use us? Theologians offer explanations, but the discomfort remains. That one phrase may be a remnant of that lost page, a moment where the original context bled through. A clue that others were present at the dawn, watching, participating, or perhaps objecting. The idea of a removed page should not lead us to distrust Scripture, but to seek it more deeply. The God of the Bible never feared mystery. He invites it. He allows space for silence and beckons us to ask why. The missing piece between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2 may not be recoverable with ink and parchment, but its echoes remain. In the tension, in the questions, in the shadows of the verses that survived. What makes this missing page so powerful is not just what it might say, but what it changes. If the darkness in Genesis wasn't just absence, but aftermath, then Eden isn't the start of the story. It's a response. Creation becomes redemption, light becomes recovery, and man, instead of being the first being, becomes the next attempt. This reframes everything: sin, salvation, even the role of the serpent. The fall of man may not have been the first fall, only the one we inherited. This also raises another unsettling question. Was Eden built on the ruins of something older? The Bible tells us the garden was planted, a deliberate act. But where? Why was there already a world beneath it? A world of rivers, stones, and lands named with ancient force. It's possible that Genesis once described the remains of a kingdom judged and forgotten. The garden wasn't created in a void, but in a place where something had already gone terribly wrong. Some of the earliest Hebrew mystical texts, like the Sefer Harazim or the Sefer Yetzirah, explore the idea of pre-creation structures, templates, spiritual blueprints, and beings who helped shape the material world. These writings are cryptic, but they point to a belief that the creation we know was layered over another, deeper reality, a sacred veil. The missing page from Genesis may have pulled back that veil too far, and that's why it was torn away. But if such knowledge was so dangerous, why was it written in the first place? Perhaps it was never meant for all. Perhaps only the seekers, the ones willing to wrestle with divine mystery, were meant to see it. Like the prophets who were shown visions they couldn't speak. Like John in Revelation, told to seal the words of thunder. God has always revealed in layers. And maybe, just maybe, Genesis once began with a layer we weren't meant to read. Yet, the deeper we look, the more Genesis seems to guard a threshold, a boundary between what was revealed and what was removed. It speaks boldly of creation, yet falls silent when asked about what came before. This silence is not weakness, it's intentional, a divine restraint. The missing page may have held truths that would unsettle foundations, the origin of darkness, the rebellion of ancient beings, the cost of divine justice before man was ever formed from dust, and yet the hints never fully vanish. When Isaiah speaks of Lucifer falling from heaven, he uses language that echoes a war, a displacement. Ezekiel speaks of a guardian cherub, perfect in beauty, cast down. These passages don't belong to Genesis, yet they feel like pieces of it, as if they once had a home in that opening scroll. If the missing page existed, perhaps it connected these visions together. Perhaps it gave names to the shadows that Genesis only implies. There is a tradition, rarely spoken, that Adam wasn't the first to walk the earth, but the first to remain. That others came before, created in glory, but fell into ruin. Genesis says, man was made from the dust of the ground. But what ground was that? If destruction preceded creation, then man rose from judgment. He carried not just divine breath, but the memory of something lost. The page removed may have told that part, and it may have terrified those who read it. Imagine reading a page that says, "This is not the beginning, this is the restoration." Such a truth would challenge every assumption. It would mean that Eden was not a paradise untouched, but a sanctuary built on sacred ruins. It would mean that humanity was not born into purity, but into a world already marked by history, war, and divine silence. And that may be the real reason that page was torn away. Some scholars believe that this hidden history was preserved, not in full, but in scattered echoes across apocryphal writings. The Book of Enoch, for instance, is not part of the canon, yet it tells of heavenly watchers, of secrets taught to mankind, and of judgment that came before the flood. What if these stories are fragments of that? Missing page? Not enough to reconstruct it, but enough to remind us that something larger once framed the opening of Genesis. A frame deliberately removed. The fear wasn't just of confusion, it was of power. If humanity knew it was part of a larger battle, one that started before time, it might begin to question its role. It might search for the enemy that fell before Eden. It might wonder why light was needed at all, unless there had been a darkness no man had yet seen. And once those questions are asked, the clean borders of theology begin to blur. Control is lost, mystery takes over, and mystery has always been dangerous. Not because it deceives, but because it demands faith. A missing page challenges certainty. It whispers that there's more to the story, that God is still telling it, and in a world where institutions prefer fixed answers, mystery becomes a threat. So they remove what they cannot manage. They tear the page, not to lie, but to simplify, to protect minds, unready for cosmic truths. Yet here we are, still drawn to the silence between the verses, still pulled toward the void in Genesis 1:2. Why? Because something in us knows. The Spirit of God hovered over the deep, not to admire it, but to confront it. And maybe that deep held the memory of a fall, of a kingdom undone, of a silent screaming to be heard again. The page may be gone, but the ache it left behind still speaks. There's a strange beauty in how Scripture handles what it doesn't say. Rather than fill every gap, it leaves space. Space for reverence, for wonder, for hunger. The Bible was never meant to be a cage for truth, but a doorway. And sometimes what's not written says as much as what is. The missing page from Genesis may have never been meant for all eyes, but for those willing to ask, to dig, to wrestle with the unknown, just like Jacob did in the dark. And maybe that's the very reason it was removed, not to hide the truth, but to invite the pursuit of it. Because some truths, when handed too easily, are treated as common, but those we seek in humility, in fear and trembling, become sacred. The lost page becomes a test. Will you stop reading when the line breaks? Or will you search the silence for what still echoes behind the words? The early scribes may have believed they were protecting us, shielding humanity from a narrative too vast, too heavy. But in doing so, they also sparked a generation of seekers, people who noticed the strange shift between verses, who saw the cracks in the surface and chose not to look away. And perhaps that was God's plan all along, not to reveal everything, but to reveal just enough to awaken the thirst. So when we read Genesis now, we do so with deeper eyes, not only for what is there, but for what was once there, for what was erased, for what was too sacred, too dangerous, too revealing. A page lost to time, but not to memory. And in the tension between light and dark, between the first verse and the second, we may find not just a mystery, but the first invitation to search for God beyond the surface. So what do we do with this mystery? Do we fear it? Or do we let it draw us closer to the heart of the Creator, the one who speaks in thunder, but also in silence? Perhaps the missing page was never about information, but transformation. It isn't just a piece of history, it's a mirror. It forces us to see our hunger for truth, our discomfort with silence, our longing for answers the world cannot give. And in that longing we find Him. Some will dismiss this idea. They will say there was never a page, never a gap, never a loss. But deep down, even they must wonder why Genesis begins the way it does, why it speaks of darkness, of void, of a spirit hovering as if healing a wound. This isn't poetic coincidence, it's theological tension, and every tension in Scripture is an open door. a call to seek what man tried to seal. The truth is, we may never recover the actual words of that page, but its presence is felt in every question Genesis refuses to answer. Its shadow stretches across history, from Eden to Revelation, and perhaps that's enough. Enough to remind us that God's story is bigger than what we see, that the first light we know may have been the second light given, that Eden was not the first beauty, but the first redemption. And if that page ever reappears, in a scroll, a fragment, a whisper in the spirit, may we be ready to read it, not with fear, but with awe, not to challenge God, but to know Him more deeply. Because the greatest truths are never forced, they're hidden, waiting for those who refuse to stop at verse 2. If this message awakened something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Every truth once hidden deserves to be heard again. By liking this video, subscribing to this channel and sharing it with others, you help restore what was once lost. And in the comments, tell us where you're watching from. Let this truth echo beyond the screen, because someone out there is still searching for what you've just discovered.